Hello everyone, and welcome back to part two of our day two of the Power of the Hashtag online event. My name is Velimir Milosev. I'm a young European ambassador from Serbia, and tonight I will have the pleasure of talking with an amazing entrepreneur, a best-selling author, an activist, Francesca Cavallo. So, Francesca, welcome. How are you?
Hello, I'm really glad to be with you tonight.
Excellent. I am too as well. Correct me if I'm mistaken, you are calling in from sunny California, right?
No, I'm calling
No?
you for cloudy Rome.
Okay. So you are near. I was just wondering if it was perhaps too early for you.
No, it's fine. It's 7 p.m. So
Okay, yeah, it's the same as here. I'm so glad that you are here to discuss some important topics with us. About feminism and children's rights and everything like that. But before we begin, I would like to introduce you to our audience. Um, um, in 2019, you founded Undercats, a publishing house that last year, I believe, published a book about coronavirus and the pandemic called Dr. Lee and the Crown-Wearing Virus. Is that
yes,
correct?
yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about it later on. But you also kind of gained international prominence in 2016 with your book Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. I actually have it right here with me, translated into Serbian. Uh, did you know that it's kind of popular here in the Western Balkans?
Yeah. I know that it's popular in a few countries. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, they are wonderful stories.
Thank you.
Um, Honestly inspiring. So before we begin with the questions, I would like to invite our audience to send in questions via Facebook Live. Please feel free to ask anything that you deem important. So yeah, let's start off with that book, Dr. Lee and the Crown-Wearing Virus. Um,
Mhm.
the pandemic happened, right?
Yeah,
And it had enormous impacts. Oh, you have it with you. It's
I have it.
that's
I
cool.
happen to have a copy here.
I'll have to get it after this event. So the pandemic had lots of effects on our society. It like impacted us in unforeseeable ways, and one of the most destructive ones was the rise of anti-Asian violence. Right,
Yes.
Asian people all over the world were blamed for basically being the people who caused the virus, which is incredibly racist. Um, and it's relevant even here in Serbia and the Western Balkans, because even though we don't have like large, small communities of Asian people, we still do have those migrants who created local businesses and who have been here for 20 years. And we saw news reports about violence against them, verbal and physical. So nasty stuff. Um, what do you think about all that? How can we go against this narrative that Asian people are the cause of the virus? What do you think?
Well, what happened was that when the pandemic started, pretty quickly schools started to close, and pretty quickly it was realized that the virus was not particularly dangerous for the health of children. And the moment that the possibility of children getting COVID was ruled out, the communication with children about the pandemic stopped.
Mm,
So the only information that was given to kids worldwide really was, you have to wash your hands, you can't see your grandparents, you can't attend business birthday parties, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was like this multitude of rules that were thrown at kids with virtually no explanation. And this was done at a time where we, the grown-ups, were consuming huge amounts of information about the coronavirus and about what was, trying to grasp what was happening and trying to have at least the feeling that we could have some sort of control of where this story was going. And in this, landscape, in this mediatic landscape, especially in the United States, which is the country that I was residing in when the pandemic started, President Trump was constantly talking about the Chinese virus, the Chinese virus, the Chinese virus. This expression rang in the ears of so many millions of people. So in this climate of, on the one hand, lack of communication with children, and on the other hand, these racist remarks that were repeated over and over again, I grew worried that a lot of children could sort of create an equation inside their imagination between an Asian-looking face and the virus that had maybe destroyed the livelihood of their families, or that was not allowing them to go to school, to see their friends. And that is the worst kind of racist, because when these kids will grow up, I thought, they will not remember that they created this weird association between something unsettling and an Asian person. They will not remember that they did it in their childhood, but they're still going to be bothered. They're going to feel like they cannot trust an Asian person. So I wanted to change this, and I wanted them, on the one hand, to have more complete information about what was happening with the pandemic. And on the other hand, I wanted to break that association between an Asian-looking face and the virus by replacing it with the association between the first hero of the pandemic, Dr. Li Wenliang, who was the first doctor who basically gave the alarm that a novel coronavirus was spreading in Wuhan, China, and he risked his own freedom because he was threatened by the police that they didn't want him to spread the news of this virus, but he did it regardless, and he risked his own freedom in order to fight the virus. So I wanted them to know and to see that the face of an Asian person was actually the face of one of the first heroes who gave up their safety to fight the pandemic. So that was, for me, the thinking behind this book.
Mm. So basically, you fear that this new generation of children will become racist because of all this propaganda and
Yes.
Conspiracy theories and other garbage.
Yeah.
That's a key point. Do you think parents are aware that this is a problem, that they can become racist?
There is a weird cognitive dissonance for parents, I think, because when you talk to parents privately, it's like there is this constant thing that they say, it's unbelievable how much my child understands. It's unbelievable how much they absorb everything that happens in the house. And on small matters, parents are usually surprised that their kids will pick up on very small things happening in the house, even though their parents haven't spoken explicitly about something with their children. But then sometimes we forget that children are so perceptive, and when it comes to big themes, when it comes to news, when it comes to current events, we forget that children absorb everything that's happening around them. And we tend to believe that children are not interested in knowing more about what is happening in the world around them. But what happens in the imagination of a child is that when they are not offered information and background for something that is happening, especially something as big and as disruptive as a pandemic, they make up explanations in their own mind And sometimes they connect their fears in ways they are not particularly healthy for them. And part of my research as an artist and as a children's book author has always been to sort of consider children not as the citizens of the future, but as citizens of the present. And if we think that children are citizens of the present, we have to be aware that we must treat them as such, which means that we must try to give them information that is tailored to their age. We must give them information that allows them to understand what is happening around them, what is happening in the world, and how they can, in their own ways, of course, contribute to the world that we're living in.
I think that's really a key. That, in my experience, Yugoslavia broke up, and during the 90s we had wars, and a similar thing happened. Children of my age and even younger, they don't have contact and with other nations, and so they have all these visions of them that are destructive to our trust between each other. So it's key that you communicate right now to them. That's really important.
There is something that sometimes we forget, because we have this idea of children's literature as this idyllic place where nothing bad ever happens. But first of all, if we look at traditional fairy tales, we can see in traditional fairy tales that there is a lot of bad that happens there, because the presence of evil characters, the presence of very difficult situations is actually very important for children to learn how to cope with their own negative feelings. And that's one thing. The other thing is that I'm a firm believer that we need a revolution in children's literature. And this is what Under Cats is about. I believe that if something is part of a child's experience of the world, it needs to be part of children's literature, because children's literature, just like adults' literature, needs to give children tools to face challenges that they are facing in their life. So if war is part of a child's experience, we need to find a way to talk about war in children's books. If being a refugee is part of the experience of a child, we need to find a way to talk about the experience of a refugee family, which is, for example, what I've done in this upcoming novel that is coming out in English in the fall, which is called Elves on the Fifth Floor. And right now, the problem with children's literature is that for the vast majority, it is hostage of the imagination of an upper white heterosexual middle class. And the kind of experiences that find a place in children's books and children's stories in general are experiences that belong to the world of an upper privileged white middle class. And but children, are not just in that social class. So when we talk about diversity and the need for diversity in children's media, we're not just talking about painting brown a few characters. We are talking about giving space to the experience of different children who may have an incarcerated parent, who may be refugees, who may go through war in their life. That's been part of my research so far.
And honestly, it's inspiring that we have such a publishing house that is ready to take on this revolution. And I'll ask you about some specific plans later on. I wanted to touch upon the effects of the pandemic on the mental health of people, and or the effect on men in particular. Because even though men in our societies are privileged, even though in most societies today, men have still more power, political, economic, cultural. There is still the downside of a patriarchal society that hampers men to tackle mental health challenges. and to even admit that they have a problem, right? It's kind of hard for a man to say, okay, it's hard for me, and this pandemic just pushed on that point even further. So even as myself a feminist, I find it hard to admit. Do you have advice for men? Do you have advice for people like myself who would like to offer support to my friends who don't want to receive such support?
Mhm. Well, I am probably not the best person to ask advice to for the problem that men have with mental health through this pandemic, because I'm not a man, and also this is not really part of my research. The main problem is that, especially through the pandemic, is what the research is saying is that it's women who took the brunt of the pandemic because of the increased rates basically everywhere of domestic violence, and because of the increased responsibility and with caring for their families and losing their jobs in droves. So part of what I've advocated also on my social media in some articles that I wrote about giving the Nobel Peace Prize to women, because frankly, I believe that women kept not just families, but entire communities and entire countries together through this pandemic. And they did so at tremendous cost, also for their mental health. So while I do understand that this is a crisis for everyone, really, I also hesitate to sort of portray men as the category that took the hit of this pandemic, because I believe that the data that we're seeing shows that this isn't true. So I think that it is crucial that governments everywhere, and that also at the European level, we support women and we make sure that they are front and center in any plans for rebuilding Europe after this crisis, because otherwise we're going to lose 50 years in terms of progress, in terms of all the progress that we've done in when we talk about the occupation of women and their participation in politics and really in every area outside of the house.
Of course, women have suffered extraordinarily through this pandemic. I believe UN Women reported that there were 5 times more calls to helplines in certain countries. I know in my hometown, NGO received 3 times more calls, which is just, it shows the extent of the damage this pandemic caused. So let's keep on the topic of women. This pandemic has also kind of affected the plans for young women who are now entering the workforce. Even they will face all of the same problems of sexism, of glass ceilings. They will face many challenges. Do you have any advice for young women who are listening now, who are beginning their careers?
Honestly, the best advice I can give them is to join forces with each other and to start creating alternative systems to work in. My experience, one of the reasons why, besides being an author, I've always been, over the past 10 years, an entrepreneur, is that, quite frankly, I didn't find space within the traditional company structures, within the traditional system. And I started to create my own opportunities, because I thought that at one point, actually at several points in my career, I perceived that I could never feel like I was fully expressing myself within the structure of a traditional patriarchal company. So I made this choice time and time again. And I questioned this choice from time to time. For example, when my experience with when my journey with Rebel Girls ended, I started to think, well, maybe I could be a more traditional author and just work with that traditional publisher. I could get an agent, and I interviewed a few big shot agents, but then I understood that there was something of inhabiting those structures that really inhibited my research for freedom. So I would like to see on the European level a lot of initiatives to encourage women to start new enterprises, new startups. Call them what you want, but to start new companies basically, and new art collectives, new anything really, because only by rebuilding these structures, I think we can finally find freedom. Because of course you can also build your own freedom within traditional structures, but at least my experience is that you will be much more limited in the kind of things that you can accomplish and the kind of life, honestly, that you can live.
I hope young women are listening. This is great advice. I'm volunteering in an NGO which was founded by 3 women because they recognized that they couldn't work through other structures which are existing. So fingers crossed that our governments and the EU and everywhere else, they support these programs. So when we're discussing the future of women and in general of children, I see a lot of progress online. I see a lot of activism online. We're talking about activism right now, and I get a lot of support as an activist myself. But it feels like I'm in a bubble, and I'm not sure if that represents what the whole generation will be like. We're talking about Gen Z and I believe Gen Alpha, the generation after that. Do you think books such as Rebel Girls and Dr. Lee, can they impact this new generation and make them be even more progressive than we right now? Or do you think we will maybe regress to a more conservative middle center? What do you think?
Well, of course, I do believe that these books can make a change. Otherwise, I wouldn't be making them.
Sure.
I think that, let me unpack your question, because I think there are 2 questions in one. On the one hand, there is the problem of the activists online in a bubble that you were talking about, and that many of us face this feeling, right? That you're like, I am posting these things, I am talking about this online, and my friends and I all agree that we have to fight racism, that we have to fight ableism, that we have to be feminist and all of that. How is this impacting the outside world? So I think this is a legitimate question, and I think online activism alone isn't enough. I believe it is something, so I don't think it's useless, because the conversations that we have online and offline have the sum of the conversations that all of us have online and offline has the power to change culture. And that is a very important power that shouldn't be taken for granted. So when we talk about certain things, when we make certain issues visible, when we start showing the people around us that we can talk about certain topics, that we can talk, for example, about men and mental health, that we can talk about, that we can be vulnerable in public spaces. When we do that, we are actually changing culture. So that, I believe that is important. I don't take that for granted. On the other hand, it is certainly true that we may sort of feel content by sharing these stuff only with people that we know are going to complement us or they're going to support us. And then what happens to the rest of the people that are in other bubbles? So I think that online activism is particularly effective if it changes you. So if it is a way for you to connect to a community that allows you to grow, so where you're not just telling other people how to behave, but you are learning how to grow as a person. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that if it is paired with your experience in the outside world, which doesn't need, it doesn't need to be something epic. It can be a conversation with your family. It can be showing up for a meeting with the other parents at school. It can mean, showing up at your church in a different way, or promoting initiatives, or ringing the bell and bringing a welcome basket to the new neighbor. It can be a sort of different things, but for example, this is especially true when we talk about race and activism. We can talk all we want about Black Lives Matter on Instagram and TikTok, but then if we don't find ways to include Black people in our private life, that is a little bit hypocritical, because we're still fostering segregation. We're still harboring apartheid within our own lives in a way, So it is cool and it's great to speak up about the rights of Black people and to do something to make sure that they live better life. But if we want to create more inclusive societies, we have to create more inclusive lives for ourselves. And that's one thing. The other part of your question that was about the role of, at least the way I hear it, is about the role of families and what impact can children's stories have in creating a world that is more inclusive and where equality is more of a reality rather than just a vision or a dream. And I believe that in this sense, up until a few years ago, there was a different understanding of parenting. Many people saw parenting just as a responsibility toward your own child. So you wanted your child to be a good parent, you wanted your child to have a good education, to eat healthy foods, to have a decent support system. It was a relationship between you and your child. But then the Me Too movement happened, and Fridays for Future happened, and Black Lives Matter happened. And all of a sudden, millions of parents around the world understood that parenting is probably the most consequential political act they will do in their entire life. They started to understand that by parenting a child, you have the opportunity to give birth to a new world. Now, that is a kind of change that can cause a tectonic shift in the world. Because if you make sure that your children grow up surrounded by stories that celebrate the world in all of its glorious diversity, it is going to be much harder for those children to buy into ideologies that are rooted in discrimination and racism and misogyny and ableism when they grow up. Because we are not teaching them that the only way of being normal is to be white, heterosexual, able-bodied. We are showing them that we come into the world in all sorts of different bodies, in all sorts of different skins, in all sorts of different circumstances. And that if we start doing this from a very early age, we are going to create an environment where we are more welcoming to diversity, naturally more welcoming to diversity, because we don't have this notion has not been implanted in our heads that there are things that are normal, there are people that are normal and other people that are not.
I think that's a really powerful message. Parenting as the most significant political act you can make. It makes you think, honestly. I didn't actually think about it that way. So just quickly, are you optimistic for the future generations? I get a feeling that you are.
I am, because I think that many of the things that I'm doing, my mom couldn't have done. And that's a very basic truth about my life, and that I think many of us can relate to, which means that despite the fact that sometimes we may feel overwhelmed, that we may feel negative about what's going on in the world, we are making progress, and we have to keep on believing that we are changing the world for the best. And sometimes will be better, sometimes will be worse, but overall, I like to think that we are surrounded by an invisible army an invisible team of people that are fighting the same battle. And we have all of these teammates that maybe we don't know who they are, but they are fighting side by side with us in every corner of the world, and we're all fighting for a world that is more, just. So I think about those invisible teammates, and I feel less lonely when I feel down, and that helps me.
That's actually something our previous guest Mary also mentioned. We are not alone as activists, as change makers. So I want to ask you, what are your plans as an activist, as a change maker at Undercats? Do you have any plans, any books to announce?
Yeah, I cannot announce because I'm going to announce it in a few days, so I can't tell you. But I can tell you that I'm very proud because we signed a huge distribution deal with one of the biggest distributors in the United States, and our books starting from July will be distributed in the United States, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So we are going to start with a picture book series that is incredibly exciting. The main stories that we're going to publish with Undercats are going to be stories about people with disabilities, about people of color, and about LGBT people, which are three categories of people that are almost completely missing right now from children's books. So I am very excited because we are working with a lot of artists from all over the world, and if you sign up for our newsletter, we'll make sure to tell you the moment that these news are public, and you go to undercats.com/goodnight, and you'll find out what happens with Undercats the moment we announce it publicly.
Awesome. And also maybe follow on Instagram and Facebook and everywhere.
Yeah, you'll find me there as Francesca the Rebel.
Excellent. We have a few questions from our audience. Let me see our first one. This comes from Sarabella from Italy. So your neighbor, perhaps. Which one is your favorite girl from your book? So from Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls.
Oh, I don't have a favorite one. I think it was very beautiful to write those stories and to be surrounded by all of these stories for a few years. And if I had to pick one, just because I come from southern Italy, I would pick the story of Serafina Battaglia, who was the first woman to testify against mafia. That is a story that it was very inspiring to write, but overall it was the sheer number of all of these stories and all of this talent that really inspired me while I was working at those books.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many to choose from. Like in the first book, you have 100. Like,
yeah,
it's an impossible. For me personally, it's the female pharaoh. Her name escapes me. Hatshepsut. Yeah, just an amazing figure. We have another question. This is from Adriana from Montenegro. So when you make books, what goes first, stories or illustration? And what is more demanding in this creative process?
In my case, the story always comes first because I am not an illustrator. So I always start from the story, and then based on the kind of atmosphere that I want to create with the story, I choose the artist that I'm going to work with. And the way that I write is actually, I can show you a little draft of the new book that I did not announce because it's going to be public in a few days. But when I write, I actually write in pencil and I sketch out the scenes because this helps me to understand the balance and especially when you write a picture book, you work in double pages, which means that the rhythm of the story needs to go with each double page is a scene. So for me, working on paper and having the same structure that the book is going to have, it helps me give the story the right pace and to help also guide the illustrator in then when we start working together in creating the scenes.
That's an interesting insight into your creative process. Maybe you should write about that as well. We have interest here, I think. We have a third question. Let's see. This comes from Bojana from Montenegro. She says, do you think that the formal education system, due to its outreach, could do more in terms of opening up discussions about all these mentioned sensitive topics? Do they actually have more power, I guess?
Yes, I absolutely do. In fact, in Italy, I've been supporting a legislation initiative about removing gender stereotypes from textbooks, which I think would be really important. Because sometimes, you know, the problem is that we not only are institutions not promoting gender equality, but sometimes they are still promoting the opposite. So we have to start from removing all these, you know, elementary school books that have these exercises where the dad goes to work and the mom is home washing the dishes. Books are full of this kind of stuff. And so creating, tools that allow governments to encourage publishers to take a hard look at whatever books they are selling to schools, and that also increase the awareness of the general public when they find something like this to be able to address it and remove it from books is very, very important. And that is a relatively easy thing that can be done. And the other thing is that I believe that in terms of mental health, since we talked about this too, schools are going to be called to do a much better job at this, especially after the pandemic and after that kids, in some cases, would be out of school for almost 2 years. And these will have a huge impact, especially on the most vulnerable part of the students' population. So to be able to rethink the schooling system in order to find back a connection with those students that in some cases will have abandoned schools, for example, is going to be crucial. And I believe that there is a lot to be done, and also a lot to be said about letting letting education come out of schools and inhabit the city more, so that you don't create a fracture between, especially for the most vulnerable students, you don't create a fracture between their school experience and their life experience, because that is the thing that then pushes many people to abandon schools, because they feel that it has nothing to do with their lives. And if we have to fix this, and this is part of the challenge that it is part of the weakness of the traditional school system that was brought up in plain light by COVID.
The thing you mentioned about privileged children had access to computers and Zoom classes, while in Serbia in particular, in rural areas, perhaps they don't have a laptop, perhaps they don't have internet connection. So we just have to rethink the whole educational system, in my opinion. So we have a last question, and the best, I would say. Julissa from Bosnia asks, when did you start identifying as a feminist? And who would be your biggest feminist role model?
I started late to identify myself as a feminist. I actually gave a speech about this in Rome in 2017 that was called, for far too long, I was not a feminist. I was scared to call myself a feminist because I didn't know what feminism was. I didn't know what it could give me. And I had a lot of bias against feminism. And part of it was because no one told me that certain things were happening to me, not because it was normal, that when people were, catcalling me in the streets, that was not normal. It was happening because I was a woman, and it was not fair. They didn't tell me that, for example, when I was in theater school and they were giving male directors bigger theaters for their shows during the academy, our time in the academy, that was not fair. It was happening because of misogyny. And a lot of these experiences, when I started in my late 20s, when I approached feminism, I started to relive many of those moments and to understand that I should have been scared about my inability to read what was happening to me rather than about feminism. So it was late, and that was part of the reason, like the fact that I came to feminism so late was part of the reason why I chose to give birth to Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls with my co-author, because that was I really understood that I should have known certain things sooner, and my certain experiences would have been different for me had I known, had I had the tools that feminism was given me.
I think that's the difference. Right now, people can find about these information much younger, and hopefully, in that sense, your story, your example, and your books will contribute to making our society more equal in every way.
That's my hope.
My hope as well. Francesca, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Everybody can check you out on Instagram, on Facebook, follow Undercats as well. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We will now have a little quiz about this book series we were talking about, Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. So stay tuned for that. Francesca, you can join. We will have a Kahoot quiz to test your knowledge, perhaps if you've forgotten anything. I would also invite everybody to join us tomorrow as well. So same place, same time, 6 p.m. We will have amazing guests as well. So stick around for our Power of the Hashtag event. Francesca, thank you again.
Thank you.